Dini Widyastuti from Plan Indonesia, Executive Director of Plan Indonesia.
I'm Haider Yaakob from Plan International Myanmar.
I'm Ram Kishan. I'm from Plan Nepal.
I'm Kubita Ghosh, Country Director, Plan International Bangladesh.
The topic for today is we're going to talk about girls in crisis, protection, power, and possibility in humanitarian setting. Probably not many people know that Plan, in addition to being a child rights organization with a mandate in development, we also have a mandate in humanitarian. So today specifically we're going to talk about humanitarian works of Plan, not just in Indonesia, but also in the 3 other countries. To give a setting also, give a descriptions, what are the challenges, what Plan has been doing in these 3 countries, and also maybe some recommendations from my fellow country directors in terms of the humanitarian setting and the power actually of girls and young women, even in the times of crisis, even in a humanitarian context. But before we start, Ram, Kabita, and Haider, we're coming up to the World Humanitarian Day. So this is a very important day for us to remind us the context of where we're living today, right? I will ask you later about the context in each of your country. But before that, maybe just to throw some facts that we are facing that, for example, 1 in 5 refugees or internally displaced girls face sexual violence. So, as we know, girls and young women already are vulnerable in normal situation, and in a humanitarian setting, it's even more so. They become more vulnerable. They're facing what's happening in the normal world, gender inequalities, violence, discrimination, marginalization. It's maybe double, triple. You are in a better position to share with us how it is in your country. And also over 12 million girls are married before the age of 18. This is also happening in Indonesia. And the conflict, the natural disaster, climate change exacerbate that. So when crisis happens, as we see currently in our world, not just in our region, but other region, is the children, is the girls and women who are mostly affected. Of course, all are affected, but mostly these marginalized groups. They're likely out of school, also lose access to critical health services, and other, things that happen to them during this conflict or disaster situation. Okay, so we would like to explore further on these issues and the challenges. But before that, I know all the 3 of you are very experienced humanitarian workers with footprints in different humanitarian setting, not just in your own country or the country you serve at the moment, but in other countries as well. So I think it is important for our listeners, audience, to also know who are the people behind Plan's international work on humanitarian works. So, who should I start first? Ini, mini, miny, mo?
I can start.
Okay, Ram, yes, please.
So, as you said, my name is Ram Kishan, and I work as the country director for Plan in Nepal. But that's my life for last 3 years in Plan. But before that, most of my life in the professional sector has been on the humanitarian. And in humanitarian, I've worked across different continents, mostly in Africa, Asia, and Middle East. And I've been into some of those large-scale humanitarian crises, whether natural or the conflict-driven. Prior to taking on the role with Plan, I was in Nigeria and managing a program which was largely addressing the IDP, the internally displaced population situation in northeast Nigeria because of the ongoing conflict there. But also worked in Afghanistan and spent time even when the regime change was happening So I was in Afghanistan on 15th August 2021
The first.
when the
fall
change
of
was happening.
Taliban.
The first. Oh, okay.
So I've seen the.
I might have seen you in, what is the market? The chicken market, the what market? Yeah?
Yeah.
Where all the humanitarian workers, because I was working also in Afghanistan at the time. But yeah, so that is an interesting and huge wealth of experience in terms of working in humanitarian. How about you, Kobita?
Thank you. As I introduced myself, my name is Kobita Bosch. I'm country director for Bangladesh, Plan International. Prior to this one, that's like I have been working in the sector, development sector, more than 28 years, but of which almost 27 years are actively engaged in humanitarian work. It's about like a nature-induced disaster like cyclone, flood, and then also let's say earthquake, and then also people created like man-created man-made
disaster,
actually
right?
disasters like conflict in different part of the world, including Bangladesh, in the Asia continent, and also West Africa and Caribbean. I think my biggest takeaway from all the humanitarian work is that we need to serve the humanity irrespective of any geographical locations, and the people who are suffering in the crisis or any disasters, most of them are not responsible at all, and in many cases they are very least responsible, but they are suffering
the most,
of the impact of the disasters made by people also. The third one is the affected people are again like girls, children, young women who are not aware even for what are the reasons they are suffering.
Right. Okay. That is a sum up, of a very long career in humanitarian. But we go back to that, okay? But we need to hear from Haider.
Yeah.
Haider,
Yes.
tell us briefly, because we can use the whole podcast to listen to your experience in humanitarian, but briefly, some of the key humanitarian setting that you have worked. Yes.
Definitely, I will. I'm Haider Yaqub. It's been a pleasure here, coming to this beautiful country of Indonesia, meeting lovely people. Not my first trip, number of times I've been here, and disasters in Indonesia are come because you are on the firewall of volcanoes all around it. Aceh is
Did
not
you
too.
work on Aceh tsunami?
I did
recovery?
not at that time because I was in Bangladesh at that
Right,
time.
right.
So, but I did work in other settings. Will do speak about those ones. But you guys are much more sensitized to disaster, natural disasters. And I tell you, if any disaster which has to be, people have to confront any disaster, the best is natural disaster because everyone sympathizes and is willing to help and support. Whereas if you work in humanitarian crisis disasters or then it's or a protracted disaster, it's very long because everyone loses interest in it, and if it is in a conflict setting, that conflict perpetuates that disaster for a longer period of time, and we'll talk about that. I've been in this. I'm a development worker who took on understanding and working on disaster because we feel that in case of emergency, in case of any disaster, people are more vulnerable, and that's the time where you need to provide more support, and that's how Plan's journey towards we emerged from a civil war as an organization in 1937 because of Spanish Civil War, but we transitioned to more of a development work. But then in 2000 and all, we realized that development people who need the most are the ones who are in middle of a crisis or a disaster. And it's very important for us to address that. And the journey of Plan was actually baby steps because it was a challenge for us to get into disasters because our statement was we are a development organization. So making that shift from development to humanitarian work was not easy, but it was a journey which Plan did take very amicably, and we were able to respond to major disasters in Asia. We were with the Afghan refugee crisis when in 2001 they crossed over from Afghanistan to Pakistan, so Plan was there to support them at that time. And then earthquakes, tsunamis, our work, and I personally have been involved in response to Haiyan in Philippines, earthquake in Nepal, flooding in Pakistan, and now I work in Myanmar, where it's a protracted crisis.
Yeah.
It is a crisis which is set in climate change impact or climate disaster.
Yeah.
On top of that, there is natural disasters. So there's interplay of multiple
disasters happening.
And that's what I'm doing.
Man-made and then also natural as well.
If I just add,
Yes.
if you look at the global humanitarian landscape now, and I think we have all seen natural disasters. So the biggest one, the Indian Ocean tsunami, and we've seen Pakistan flood, we've seen earthquake and Haiyan. I think if you look at the current context, you see more of protected humanitarian crisis. So whether it is in this region or in Africa or Middle
Yes.
East, and that has led to a more of very different way of people looking at humanitarian work. Because when there's a natural disaster, there is a natural way of people coming in for support. So
Right.
the level of
Yeah.
support or empathy is much higher. But when it is protected crisis, in general, people feel this is their problem. And I think that's where we are, whether it is the global humanitarian development community, see, okay, it's the people fighting against them. It's within them to sort it out.
Right.
And that is where it has become even more challenging for humanitarian workers to be there, because you don't know what is the end of the conflict and when do you start and end. Whereas in humanitarian crisis, because of natural disaster, there is an event and then you do a response, recovery and
Right.
reconstruction.
And the conflicts also could be very divisive, right? So you don't want to be open like you're favoring one or the other, or to be seen like that. And then you sort of like, put a cover and then we don't want to know. That's not our problem.
Right.
But the fact it is our problem.
Yeah.
And when we talk about girls, when we talk about children and women, this is especially important. But as women, Kapita, working in humanitarian sector, so this is we could probably have the same point of view, both women and men humanitarian worker, but from your point of view, the one that you witness, how does the conflict, the natural disaster where you work, the consequences on women and girls and children? Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, so I'd like to start with that one that Ram and Haider was talking about, the protracted one. I think the protracted one is like, in the beginning, in few months or few weeks, people get very empathetical or very emotional. So they really jump, the world supports jump on it. And then so that's the beginning, from the beginning also, people are very generic to support other things. And then from the beginning, most of the times women and children are forgotten because it is really rush, it's really rapid. And then they're the severely, sufferer, right? Especially women and children and girls. And they take sometimes times also to settle down, even in the protracted and the nature-induced one. And then another part during the nature-induced one, like flood or cyclone, being a women humanitarian worker, number one is that sometimes we find very rare number of women worker in the crisis. Back in 1997 and 8, when I started, I have never seen a women other than me.
Right.
Among 30 people, 60 people, in a
Minority.
conference and workshop. I was in Bangladesh, I started my career and I was the only one, I think, And
Not
then
even a
sometimes-
minority. The only
It's like
one.
that. So-
Solo women.
Yeah.
All this flood of humanitarian workers.
And there are many reasons behind. It's like from
Right.
where we are coming and from how the settlement of, during the humanitarian response. So women are themselves, they don't feel safe to
Safe.
go. They don't feel comfortable. Their families don't allow in that insecure situation. There are many reasons behind. So bringing that perspective, being educated, skilled women, you cannot go in that crisis. So you can imagine the people, girls, women who are living in that setup, what would be their sufferings. So their voices, their problems are left out in many cases. It's not the problem of man, I'm not saying that one. It's the problem of that how we look at the problem. I can tell you, like, it's back in, I think, almost 20 years before it was in Bangladesh. It was in Haiti. We had flash flood. And from the mountain, the flash flood, in just 10 hours, the houses are gone. And then our WASH experts, they have gone there for assessment, and everybody was looking only the WASH problem because the WASH expert has gone. But nobody was looking that women could not feed their children because of the privacy issues. So they were feeling. So you see the small things, but it makes a lot of difference. It's not a problem. It's like the problem of
it's
the
problem of
how we are
protection,
getting it.
ensuring protection.
Exactly. There's the opposite picture in Bangladesh I have seen in a flood situation. Everybody during the need assessment came that okay, we need livelihood, we need food, but nobody is talking that women cannot go to the toilet during the daytime. They have to wait for the night because there is no toilet on the IDP places in the makeshift shelter. So this is like when women stop, they went for the need assessment, so they found this one. So this is the I think impact and implication of not being not women in the part of the whole assessment and the program design. At the same time, our ways of working in the humanitarian setup sometimes not to be very understandable. The masculine, the knowledge. I think.
So we need more women in humanitarian. But go back to you, Haider. You're mentioning, if we could choose, well, no one's want to be in that kind of situation, but the protracted conflicts actually bringing, far worse consequences and longer term than natural disaster that happened once, for example, right? Can you tell us some of the impacts on girls and women that you see during your career, for example, just to give, an idea that the kind of the extent, the kind of situations that they are facing. Also, what happened probably.
You're very right. Every disaster hits people in a different way.
Right. Yes.
If the same household, as Kavita mentioned, the issues of women are very different, and the support for them should be very specific to their needs. Privacy being one, feeding children too, dignity, kit, and all that thing, and protection and all that is very, very important. And as a humanitarian worker, we need to make sure that our responses are gender sensitive, our responses are in line with the global standards. So it's not that what we want to do, we go and do it. We do it as per a standard. Another thing is, needs to have a very good coordination mechanism so that multiple people get the benefit. It's not that one place which is the closest and they get it. And we have seen this happen so many a time, that everything is dumped at one location because it's easier for everyone to do. So it's very important that humanitarian workers are allowed to do the work as they are professional in that area and go and serve. Otherwise we'll have, and we do see a lot of media these days of the stories, what disaster is, response is doing is bringing more disaster to that area. So it's very important that we are sensitized to it. Women, young women are impacted more, and the children are at risk of taken away, because that's the thing. When perpetrators are in action, they take young girls away.
Often in a situation of chaos, right?
It's,
So
definitely.
in a camp or families
setting.
are scattered. So that's
It's so sad that when humanity is at the lowest ebb of it, that's where the perpetrators get at their prime and trying to
Yes,
take
yeah.
people away for trafficking and all that. So it's very important that as a humanitarian player that we play our part very well. We bring in protection right center of all our responses. Now the other thing is, which is what we see is the coping mechanism. And especially in protracted crisis, the coping mechanism becomes a very critical element for young women and children as well, because children are put to work, or girls, they're married off, because then you have one mouth less to feed.
Yes.
So your responses have to be very specific to what is happening. So it's very important that we are open to whatever is happening. We carry out scans, we talk to others, we share, we work together, we coordinate so that duplication of effort does not take place. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes. Okay, let's continue the conversation. From Haider, what I got really, when we respond to humanitarian or conflict setting, we're talking about scale, but we're talking about speed. But also at the same time meeting the standard, the sphere standard, and being sensitive about how different groups, especially when we talk about girls and women and children, about their needs. And what's the best way to meet their needs with all the different constraints that is happening, at that setting. So I can imagine, and it's also from experience, the pressure. But I would like to go to you, Ram, from your experience. Do you find the same thing that what Haider said about these scales, about being sensitive? Maybe you can flesh out a little bit from your experience.
So I just reflect and just going further to what Heather just said. I think we are dealing with a very deep-rooted issue of inequality, power imbalance, and I think it's exaggerated when you look at the humanitarian setting, but it's a reflection of our society the way it is, and where there are people who have privileges and power, and there are those who do not have it. And even if you go further and look at the intersectionality of who has the power, obviously those who have resources and power because of their status and all. And in that, you will see children, because of vulnerability, are at the bottom. But then you also have girls and young women who are vulnerable beyond their kind of disadvantage that we talk about. And it reflects at family level. So I work in Nepal, and naturally there is a preference for a boy in a family. And when you have a girl, then you have to choose. If you have less resources, you would want your boy to go to the school. You have food, and if you don't have enough food, the boy will get the first share, and then the girl will get it. So at all level you see that disadvantage, and that comes to the humanitarian setting. When you have even less resources, whether it is Nepal, or I talked about Nigeria or Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and wherever, children and the girls will be the last one who will be consulted, and women at household. If you look at a situation where you have to design your humanitarian intervention, and when you go for a community consultation, more often you will see men being more vocal, because women always feel that they are disadvantaged or they do not have same voice. And if you really want to design a program which is more equitable, which is more appropriate and reaching those who need it most, it has to make sure that we consult everyone, and we need to create that space. So consultation is so important because that gives power. So voice attributes power to you that you can say. And then second is responsibility of organizational plan to incorporate those feedback and suggestions that come through consultation to design. Say for example, I give you an example. If I used to work in India, and it used to get flooded every year, especially a part of Bihar. I went for the first time, and we were consulting as to what is required at community level, and everybody was said, yeah, we need food, or we need non-food item. And finally we had a side meeting with women, and they said we need privacy for precisely what Kavita was saying. You need space where you can feed your children. you need a place where you can go for toilet.
Yeah.
So that was the priority, and I think it differs so much when you talk to different people. So if you don't talk to the most vulnerable,
Exactly.
your response is going to be very lopsided, and that's what we need to be very careful. I think Plan is very committed to make sure that we reach out to the most vulnerable and those who need, and also the kind of support that should be required, and working alongside girls in their leadership and moving on. And I just talk about vulnerability and why we talk about humanitarian. I'm sure the whole world knows about Chibok girls abduction in Nigeria, where over 300 girls were abducted by Boko Haram. And so far, not all of them have come back. And even those who have come back, I was there when that happened, and they have not been accepted by family because some came pregnant, some came with children. So one, they had gone through that misery of being abducted and that life. When they rescued or they came back,
And they're stigmatized.
they're stigmatized.
Yeah.
So
wow.
that's the stigma is on the girl who
Yeah.
had no fault of hers.
Oh, wow. Kavita,
I'd like to add one thing
experience.
that Ram was talking about that has plan, as you were mentioning that about the plans. In Bangladesh, actually, we are very much, motivated and committed to be speedy, especially to reach with skill and speed.
Skill, exactly.
Especially like if it is like slow onset, that's plant, let's say, it's slow onset
Yeah.
compared to cyclone in Bangladesh. You know, in Bangladesh, in 12 months, we get almost 10 disasters,
Right.
small and big. But I mean, the slow onset and speed onset. So rapid onset is like last year we had flash flood in Bangladesh, and it didn't happen in last 50 years. So until 2024. Before that, the 3-4 generation, they have never seen more experience in the east part of Bangladesh. But having our very good preparedness at plant level and also partners level, having right partner, right skill and technological connection with our preparedness, though plant has a mandate 72 hours to reach, but we reached there by 48 hours.
Wow.
So I want
Yeah.
to make sure that there's like, because in terms of the speed is very important, especially people where people have never experienced, they don't know, they are shocked, they are traumatized or
Right.
And another part about what Ram was saying also, I would just like to add on that is about the girls and women's issues. Even in the imbalanced world, like a very, very unequal world, in 2017, I was in Rohingya camp where people were just, the big influx in 2017. You know, the inequality even within the groups. We were talking about the women's safety and security because they could not go out because of the darkness in the makeshift shelter. That time it was not established shelter. Even we went there with the proposal that we will be ensuring to work on lightning at the light and to ensure so that they can go to the toilet at night without any issue. So even they were not able to raise their voice. So we were asking the question in a small part of the shelter. Men were surrounding us, what we are talking about. So women were not even free to talk and share their problems. Because
They feel intimidated to talk, yeah.
So it was so even in understanding the needs of women, girls, their privacy issues sometimes is because of within the group there is power imbalance issues. So it's not only the economical power imbalance in that, even within the power. So what men will tell the women, only you will share that information. So we have to work a lot to break that issues within the Rohingya groups, and then we were able to establish the light in the camp.
But to me, it underlines the importance of preparedness, as you say. So these rules of inequality.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning either about plans being a development and humanitarian, but these days I think like we cannot really separate in the areas, regions where we work.
It's nexus.
Exactly, nexus. So what you're talking about, Ram, is about the inequality. So okay, fine, we have standards. But norms, the norms in the community affected by disaster, by conflict, is exacerbated, right, with the situation. So it's really important, is to say the nexus, the preparedness, but one also understanding the even the power within.
Yeah.
Because sometimes from people from outside, oh, it's the Rohingya or it's the whoever, but actually within that, there's a power structure that we need to understand. I would like to bring actually the issue of localization of humanitarian response, right? On that. So maybe I'll go to Haider. How do you see the push for localization? You think that within the context, that's the right direction, or do you see that is actually some parts of the humanitarian world or trying to release responsibility? When they talk about localization, like, oh yeah, localization, you do the response, so we're out of it. What do you think?
Okay, I have my views, and my personal views about it. Because
it's a safe space.
it is. It is, and but it's important to express your views, which may be radical. Doesn't really matter. What matters is we get the job done right.
Yes, exactly.
Localization as a concept, amazing, fantastic. But when you do a response and your all work is towards response, and you expect localization as an outcome of something else, it does not happen that way. I think it's very important that localization is taken seriously, rather than you get someone to go and deliver your service and you say, my money has been spent and this local partner has done it, and what you have actually done is you've hired a service contractor to get your work done. It's not localization. Localization is actually when you build capacities of the institution who is sitting there and can work with multiple players rather than just you, because you're giving them that service. They can perform it for a longer period of time. That is
So
localization.
no shortcut, right?
I don't think there is
Localization.
shortcut. I'll share Plan Story.
Right,
Plan
right,
Story,
okay.
there was an organization which just worked in Spain and then went on to work in half of the world. It's a localization journey. Now, we build local capacities, we do, and like even in Myanmar, it's only me and one more colleague of mine who's there to help systems strengthening in that team so that we can bring in experience, but the team becomes a local entity and no longer. Now the only reason is we are not local entity because we are not registered. But all other things are same. Now if you look at that, it requires a lot of resources. Are coming here, when we come and talk about that, that's a resource we are putting in to learn from each other and build. And now when we go and work with someone else and we ask them to go and do that work, and we say we have done localization because 20% of our budget or 80% of our budget is sent through local partners, it's just an output code in a financial system. I think it should not be taken as a byproduct. It should be main intervention, and organizations and the humanitarian sector needs to pay for the right amount so that the institutions become and they flourish, and then they can serve the population much better. They're the first responders. We come in much later. We bring in resources, we bring in ideas, we bring in system, but the local first responders are the people who are living just there, and we have to help them to have that institution, that agency which can help people when they need the help the fastest. So that's my take on it. Localization is not just a buzzword, or you say, I give 7% and you must localize, or 10%. If in our context, what I feel is, it requires a lot more resources. It requires a concerted effort, and it's a direction we should be heading rather than a byproduct of something else we do and we are localized. I think that is where the harm comes in.
This is actually one of my favorite topics, localization, because I think even the discourse or the discussion about localization is done pretty much in a way that is shutting down the local voices of a local, But Kavita, your take on it? Do you disagree with Haider or adding to the fire, or?
I completely agree with Haider. And also I think plan, and also my, as a development and humanitarian practitioner, I believe the same way that it's an accompaniment also. It's simultaneous work, it's system strengthening, and it's complementary. Because there should be a complementarity in localization process. For example, who talks about localization? Government doesn't talk about it because they don't need it, because they have already a system. For example, like in South Asian countries, there is a local panchayat in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, Nepal, India. So those organizations are I think 250 years old almost, more than that. So government doesn't need to, because they have already local agency on the ground. Who talks about it? It's like international NGO, even they talk about it because they really need to learn it sometimes. And there should be like something that clear distinction of the role. Like I should not impose something to the community, like plan should not. And then it's a supplementary, it's complementary each other. Local organizations, local community, they know the most about their needs, about their problems, and the solution. Sometimes the lack of resources are issued, sometimes, not always, sometimes even the resource in terms of financial resources I'm talking about, not the knowledge, not guidance, etc. So that time they need support. So I think they are the first one.
Responding, yes.
Is not only responder, they are the first actor for everything. And without them, international agency cannot do anything. So for them, they are the target group, for them that is their problem, they are the solution provider, they are the decision maker. We are just the facilitator there. And second part is that in doing so, we really need to think about the sustainability part also. How? As Chandra was saying, is like one shot, is like one-time things? No, it doesn't work. Like for example, I was talking about that last year we responded to the local agency. Plan cannot respond in 48 hours in those all on a sudden.
Yeah.
It was only possible by the local
partners, yes.
Local partner.
That's right.
They had already the capacity. So those support they need sometimes, because plan is an international organization, bringing knowledge from different part of the world. So those things they need, because they don't have that connection. So we can make that connection, bringing the learning and that part.
Or
so
like
that is the value addition we can do, a very minimum actually.
Yeah, or like what we do is to help establish a system of data. Because the data is sometimes scattered. Exactly.
Yeah.
But Ram, any
I just
additional?
wanted to add
Oh,
one
go
thing.
ahead.
In the localization process, there is another power inequality.
Right.
Women rights organization, marginalized people organization.
It's not there. Not
It's not
that
there.
we're talking about.
There is another
People
power
with
inequality.
disability.
Yeah.
In the localization
Yeah,
process.
organization people with disability.
Disability, then,
Yeah.
indigenous people. So those part again, we have to be very, very mindful and careful for investment, for bringing their voice and bringing their capacity up to them.
Yeah. Yes.
So my take, and that's also my favorite topic.
This is, I mean, they are drinking coffee, by the way, Ram and Haider's drinking coffee. If we add more coffee, we'll be here forever talking about localization, humanitarian response to this very passionate
And I've seen
discussion.
humanitarian for last 9 years at least, when this was first and maybe more prominently discussed at the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul 2016. And I've seen the journey. And it started with a very noble idea of making sure that we keep the affected population at the center.
Right.
So what is localization? For me, localization means it's not looking at how many intermediaries we have in between. Like, is it the international NGO or a local NGO or a local government? But how is it really addressing the real issues of the community? And like the identity is one part of it, but then how do you make sure that you deliver the best program, engage community and bring the ownership? And I think that's where we lost the plot on localization. And we are moving even further from the objective of localization in that way. And I really get very, very concerned the way this has evolved, because there was one civil society before. Whether you are international or local NGO, you are working as one civil society. But now there is a local civil society and there is international civil society. So this whole localization has created a divide within a very unified civil society voice at all levels. This need to be repaired, and I think sooner the better, because that's where it is. And second is, who asks for localization? when you look at the humanitarian summit, there were nobody from community. It was mainly NGOs, international NGOs, and others who came in. So we need to also look at the real purpose of localization and how do we achieve it. Because this is something which everybody has understood in their own perspective. And in the end, it has become more of a debate, and which is not settled in 9 years, and which is coming to a review now. Next year, there will be a review for the humanitarian summit, commitment, and grand bargain, and charter for change, and everything. I think we are very far away from achieving what we wanted to achieve. So there is definitely some soul searching required at all levels. And how do we make sure that we keep the affected communities and people at the center, and then not really get back and forth and get into debate on who's local, who's not local, because that's not unending debate.
Yeah.
And last point which I say, and this can be a little controversial, like
Okay.
another was saying.
Bring it on. Yes, we like
My
controversial
experience is
things.
that the localization debate has been understood. It actually perpetuates the inequality in that country.
Oh, tell us. What do you mean by that?
So usually when we talk about localization, usually you will see those who have the loudest voice, those who are more privileged, and those who have been more kind of access to resources occupy the space when it comes to local. Because even in that environment, the disadvantaged still don't get. We talked about organization of person with disability, women right organization, they don't really find a space. So localization in current form is actually perpetuating more of inequality space that we operate in.
Yeah, so I think if we go
Dini.
back to localization, meaning that putting affected community in the center, inclusive, girls, children, women, and people with disability, then that's the essence of it.
Yeah.
But
Can
you
I-
have a point.
Can I just a couple of points? I think you get what you can measure. The thing you can't measure, you will not get, because you don't know whether you got it or not. So it's very important. What instrument we have used to measure whether you are local or not is the money transfer. How much money is going there? It's a very wrong indicator.
Yeah.
So, and that is being used. The other thing which is the driver of localization is risk transferring. Because you can't do it, you just forward that risk to someone else to do it. I think both these drivers are wrong. I think there's a lot of work which needs to be done. I think there's a lot of capacity building which needs to be, our own capacity to understand, as Ram and Kavita have mentioned, our own capacity to understand what are actually the needs of which segment of the society we are talking about. So it's a long journey. And the third thing is, which is a point I had not previously thought, and you brought it up, which is so good. Our work should not create fragmentation. It should bring societies closer. And now, with this localization agenda, what we've done is we have created unnecessary competition between everyone involved, which is not good, because your resources should go to the people who actually need it the most, in the most effective possible way. Now the whole mechanism, the aid delivery system, it's a very competitive system. It takes a lot of resources to make such a machinery function. So I think it's a time that a rethought of the whole system is done. It has to be made more efficient, and there's more resources put in preparedness.
Right.
So that there are people prepared. The first responder, I cannot be first responder.
Yeah.
So it has to be
None of
first
us.
responder who needs to know how to look after a girl at that time when the disaster is at her doorstep. How do their case is being managed, how the police is responsible, how the other institutions who are engaged in providing service and protection to children are made accountable and capacitated. First capacitated, then accountable. Accountability comes first, people will shy away from it. You build their capacity and make them accountable to it. That's where very important topic which you are taking on head on is use of media for it. And how do we bring in more people to change their opinion in this? It's not just giving something away, it's helping people to have a more sustained lifestyle. How we can make sure that climate justice is done. How we make sure that people who are in the middle of conflict are protected. How and what role we can all play. It's not just giving a kit to them or providing one-time food and say, oh, we've done our job. No, I think we have to go to the root causes of it.
Thank you, Haider. This is a long ultra marathon, right?
That is.
What we are into, and we, as a leader in this space, at I don't know what we call it, Southern leaders or whatever, really also have the responsibility to use every avenues that we have, the media, and wherever we go to speak about it. But at the center of it, I see that there is a notion of, let's not involving community enough, not being inclusive enough, that there is a stigma that the affected population, they are powerless. And especially girls and women, children, they're powerless. But we know from our work that girls, children, women can be agents of change, can be really the one providing solution within this humanitarian context. And I know you have some examples of that from the country you work with. So maybe I'll start with Ram first. Can you give some examples on that?
Yeah, so when we say they are powerless, this is our notion and preassumption of saying they are powerless. Because we see them as individuals, we see them powerless. But we have not really realized the collective power of young people, and they have much better articulation of their challenges but also have solutions. I'll give you two examples. One from our work on child early and forced marriage. And we realize this is a big issue. In South Asia, Nepal is like second worst in terms of early forced marriage.
Yes.
And we work with young ambassadors. So we have young people who have been trained, who have been taught about the legal provisions and all. And now they are the one who are talking about not having early marriage. So in Nepal, the legal age marriage for boys is 21 and for girls is 20. And they are the one, if they get to know that anybody who is at the risk of getting married or getting married, they go and talk to the family. And if they don't agree, then they inform the local government, who is then responsible to make sure it doesn't happen. They do it collectively. If they are asked to do it alone, they probably won't be able to do it because they see vulnerability of that. So that's one where young people are taking leadership in addressing a very, very social issue, which is ingrained in the economic factors, but also social factors and cultural factors. The second is on disaster preparedness. And our experience in Nepal has been the best way of addressing disaster preparedness is to work through schools and work with young people and children, because they become the agent of going back home.
Yes.
If you tell them, okay, when you're building your house, you should be building your house in a safer place, or it should have, if you're in a flood-plain area, you should have a higher plane, or in landslide area. And our approach of working with children in the school has really worked. So it's not only making school safe, but making the whole community safe. And that's where children or the young people have become the agent of taking the message back, talking to the parents, talking to the community, and talking about good practices. So these are two examples that we have seen really work very well. And in response, as we've seen that if you involve young people in consultation, you get options which are much better, and I think they're much more appropriate for the response.
Haider, can you give some examples?
Yeah, well, Ram has touched upon most important points, but I'll make just one or two more. Champion of Change's plans, tested methodology. It has been used the world over, and it's a very nice process by which a group, not just girls but boys also, because it's a society. Everyone has a role.
Actually, we need also men and boys.
Definitely we do. And this whole methodology is engaging men and boys to perform their duties in fulfilling women's and girls' rights and responsibilities. So, which is great. And what we have seen with my experiences, that you create champions of change, leaders who become leaders in their own respective communities when they go back. So their role is they become an agency for change. So it's a great thing we do. I feel that anything and everything we do, we need to bring in a gender sensitivity element in it so that people are aware of it. And I tell you, parents are. If you make them a little more sensitized, they want to see a better life for their children. So it's important that we play to that goodwill in their hearts. And Champion of Change helps us to do that, and our other interventions also do that. And the sooner you start with it, the longer impact of all this would be on the community, on the family, and the country as such. The most important is education. If we don't keep young girls and boys as well in education, what is the impact of not educating a generation today is such a heavy cost for the whole nation tomorrow.
Right.
So it's very important that we continue to focus even in disasters and whatever. Education should not be compromised, because this is the key for country's future, it is the key for the family's future, and it is the key for that individual girl or boy's future. So that key needs to be provided, and Plan does an excellent job at it, because we believe that education is a great driver for change, and with Champion of Change and education, which schools plays an important role in it. And I think we'll have a better society in the longer run, provided good quality education is provided. It's not just the building, it's the quality and the curriculum. If these two things and good teachers are there, I think we've got everything going.
Kavita?
Yes,
Some examples?
I think what you are mentioning both Haider and Ram, I completely agree with them. I just few points from my side is yes, this is the social notions that girls are powerless and they have less power, women are powerless, all those things. But in our experiences in our program area and also through our influencing work, we have seen that they can be the most powerful one. So how that part plan is systematically working with the girls, working with the parents, working with the social leaders, working with very most conventional institutional like madrasa, primary school, high school, and working with the system people like teachers, policymakers also, that how we can systematically integrate girls' power, gender issues, equality issues into school, irrespective of the levels, like from 0 to up to the adolescent level. One of our greatest learning is that from the cyclone response last year, it was like, after any disasters, the first things happen is that girls drop out from schools. They stop going to schools because of many reasons. One of the main reasons we found is that they lost their books. They lost that. The second one is after disasters, they don't have a good house. The house destroys, especially from flood and cyclone. So because of the safety issues, social pressure, they are sent to either relatives' house or married off. And there is another reason also, that because of the poverty issues after disaster, so one plate is less to eat, so that parents also force. So plan systematically works with them, with these people, especially with community people, so that girls are not perceived as a burden of that one. If a girls are facing safety and security issues, that is not her problems, that's the society problem. So how community can be aware about that one, so that they are not perceived as like bad girls if they don't have house or like they should not be forced for early marriages. Small intervention, at the same time social awareness, and then continuation of educations are helping, and they are changing their life and also making examples for many other girls. I think teachers, roles of teachers, roles of father, and in most cases our experience, the roles of neighbors are also very important.
Neighbors, okay. This is
because neighbors are the main culprit to create buzz. Oh, your girls are bad because she is like that one. Because you don't have house, your girls are getting very noticed by the young boy. So send her
Get her married.
Get her married. So those are the things. So that's why we work as a community approach. So
Right.
it's like individual approach, community cohort, and of course youth. At the school level, our intervention for awareness, girls and boys brigade, volunteer groups, and they go to the community back and they talk about no, girls can't do that. So in doing so, we found that girls are victim when they die, or people when they die they become victim. But if they survive, they are not victim. They are the
They're survivors, they,
yeah. So they are not the
can
victim
be
actually.
agents
So
of
they are the role
change.
changer. They are the game changer in the society and family.
Yes, I mean, from Indonesia, is similar experience where young people can be empowered to be peer educators. They can, influence, raise awareness of their fellows, students, for example,
Yeah.
but also parents, especially in this part of the world. I think the collective power, but also support of the whole community, not just individuals, but really collective, and the importance of elder parents in there. So like the whole community approach is really essential. And then I like the thinking about children as the catalyst for change,
Yeah.
from school to change the whole, from family to community. We can go on, discussing this
Days and
forever, right? Yeah. But before we close, I would like you to maybe say very briefly, like closing statement, recommendation, or whatever you want to say, to use this space very briefly. And then, so maybe that is something that is a message also for the audience, something, a homework for all of us, because when we're talking about this is not just responsibility of PLAN or NGOs, it's everyone's in terms of preparing, but also responding is a collective responsibility.
Yeah.
So I'll start with you first, Kavita.
Yeah. International Humanitarian Day, I would like to share that wherever we are in the world, irrespective of Indonesia, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Nepal, any part of the world, we are people. We are the player for bringing the good things. We are the player to support each other as a human being, not as only planet star. We need to be very, very mindful that disaster happens, crisis happens, and sometimes we are very powerless to stop disaster or crisis. But we are the very powerful one to support each other, to uplift the humanity. And if we do that, even in the crisis time, even in the suffering time, people get strength and they become the double powerful for their own life and also uplifting their neighbor and then others. The last point is that if we invest with the humanity for the preparedness and also to extend our hands, we can really, really make a different world that we want.
Thank you, Kavita. That's really the point, and really very important points for us to take. But Ram, what are your closing statement?
So I think I would like to reflect back on saying that the world has changed a lot, and over our lifetime we have seen, at least in our generation, I would say, we are not still young, in part of the young generation, but seen a lot of water have flown under the bridge, and it is very divided world. And I think we've seen more and more disagreements in the global platform. We don't really have a global leadership anymore, and that is causing more and more conflict. And I think that's going to lead to more of humanitarian crisis, which I hope doesn't happen, but I think it doesn't look like it will be. The only hope we have is the next generation is ready to really look world in a different way. The feeling of nationalization, feeling of being nationalistic is actually seen and causing more challenges and dividing the world, because it's all about my space, your space, all of it. We have gone through that in 40s, and then from there we came to a globalized world, and now we are going back to the same space. We're talking about who is outsider, who is insider. So I think there's a real need for young people to be taught well, an organizational plan which can't do everything. We are not everywhere, we need more of allies and maybe government and everyone to talk about what kind of a world we want to see. And young people have the power to change. So giving the right messaging, being prepared for the future challenges like climate change, disaster preparedness, but also good governance. Because at the end of the day, if we don't really have a good governance in countries that we work, and these are the one who will be future leader, they will be future bureaucrats. If we invest now on the right ways of looking at development, humanitarian, and empathetical world, I think that's our responsibility and everybody's responsibility to make sure that we give the right guidance and also learn from them, because I think we have so much of idea of thinking we know everything and we go into preaching mode, but we need to be open for listening. And best learning that I've had over the years is listening to people with open mind and not going with preconceived solutions that this is what you should do. And I think we do that at home. I think we know when we talk to our kids, if we tell them that with authority, probably it's very less that it goes away. I think if we are open to conversation, then we get the best result. So I think my only message, and I'd say this everywhere, that let's be open to be criticized, let's be open for new ideas, and let's invest in future generation, because they are the one who are going to lead this world to a better place. Right.
Thank you, Ram. How about you, Haider?
It's always very difficult to have last statement, especially when you have such a learned group of people in there, Dini. But I'll start with thanking you for taking time out and bringing us together to learn from each other and also share with wider audience. From my side, I would say it's time to act. It's not that you can be just on the sides thinking that things will happen by themselves. I think it's very important that people speak out whatever they advocate for their point of view and they act on it. And if that happens and people are taking the right messages, I think it can create enough momentum for bringing positive changes in the world. May that be because we respond to a disaster, natural, man-made, human-made, or we are addressing climate injustice, or we are making our effort in addressing inequalities in people. So it's very important that we make that commitment that we can do it, and we have faith in it, and we continue to bring in more people and gather enough momentum in this particular movement for making a change in the world. I think that is what I would say, but I would say thank you very much.
Thank you, Haider. Thank you, Kavita and Ram. The situation that we are facing in the world, I think this is not going to be the end of humanitarian, of conflict situation. We'll be seeing more, and we need the strength, but we do have the strength, we do have the collective power, and within that, children, young people, girls, and young women, they do have the power. We need to recognize them, we need to recognize their voice, and also giving them space to be able to manifest that power, that potential, because at the end of the day, they are the actors of this, they are the one giving solution. Our role is to facilitate, to amplify, perhaps to leverage, but we are the supporting actors. If it is a film, we are not the main character. We're supposed to be the supporting characters. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Dini.
And then inside, I have to tell you, feel like very proud to be part of these organizations, to be working with you all, the three of you, and I know there's so many other country directors, people at the different level of organization who are very serious and committed about this. And as a determined optimist, I think, we get this. We can do this together, as Kavita said. Okay, thank you. This is a session for INCIBE Talk for today. We're going to have another interesting conversations in the next episode. So watch this space. Bye from now.
Bye. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.